So you got a bottleneck of the three permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. You got a bottleneck that we call America, France, and Britain. They're the bottlenecks that refuse to let all nations on earth be permanent members and have equal veto power when they vote as equal members. This bottleneck of the United Nations, the ones that are pushing the world into nuclear destruction. Macron, President of France, Biden, outgoing President of America, and the Prime Minister of Britain. And as permanent three members of the Security Council of the United Nations, they decided to attack Russia directly and to push the war and the world into nuclear destruction. Nuclear war, War 3. And these are the bottlenecks that refuse all nations on earth to be permanent members of the Security Council because they want to control the world order, the Western-led world order. They want to be hegemonic power. It's like they get a monopoly as three nations on earth to have impunity to push the world into nuclear destruction. Delusional leaders like Biden that suffers from dementia and Alzheimer's. You can imagine Biden in a Corvette, not knowing how to tell the difference with his aviational glasses as he speeds down the road, going through red lights, running red lights at high speeds, not knowing the difference between a green light and a red light when he gave the green light by crossing so many red lines to bombard deep into Russia. As a Alzheimer dementia that barely knows his consciousness and self-awareness. And then you got a Prime Minister of Britain, wet behind the ears because they always pick the wrong leaders in Downing Street. And then you got President Macron with a swollen head, a Napoleonic Bonaparte that deserves to be stuck in Canary Island in retirement, writing his retirement memoirs. Insulated from everybody else. In a little island by himself writing his retirement memoirs. But you got this bottleneck, a relic of World War II. The three Western hegemonic powers within the United Nations, the one that set up the United Nations rules-based orders to fit their interests to this very day. They make up the rules as they go along. They want to set the world norms to be the World International Accords under the charter of this United Nations that they think they have a monopoly on. That they think that they can be the bottleneck to the rest of the world's national security interests. That they think they can set the Western-led rules, the world-based rules. They control the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. They control the World Bank, the Bank of Settlements, the World Trade Organizations, the SWIFT systems, the Moody SWIFT systems. They control it all because they make the rules to suit their own interests, while the rest of the third world is held in captivity. The rest of the global south is their colonies, under this American dollar, propped up by the banks of London to float the Eurozone through the stock exchange of Wall Street. And between these monopolistical Western powers, they want to push the world into nuclear infernos. Biden wants to drive with his Corvette speeding down the road with his aviation glasses and his dementia Alzheimer's, crossing so many red lights at a high velocity speed because he wants to give the green light to attack all of Russia with long-range ATACMS. Derangement, if you ask me. Mental derangement. That's why we fired him and kicked him out of the Oval Office. But in his last days, he wanted to be mischievous, like a slight to the Democratic Party. On his way out, he wanted to burn the house down and say, "Oh, y'all messed me over, Democrats. So I'm just going to be mischievous in my last days." And he wants to burn the whole house down because he felt offended. I could have really won a third term. Really, really. No joke, really. I could have won. Thinking that he lost because of the CNN debate. No, we kicked him out because he was a nuclear recluse. We knew what he was up to. But he decided to sly me again and defy my orders again. Not to attack directly Russia. Because Russia has 6,000 nukes. Yeah, America has 6,000. France and Britain has their nukes. So why the hell are y'all going for Armageddon days? As the bottleneck members of these three Western Alliance members. That from the League of Nations, from the laws of the open seas, they developed the League of Nations. The Bretton Woods to colonize the world. And all of a sudden, after World War II, the United Nations. But now, ever since then, they controlled the world order as a bottleneck on the world stage when it comes to the world national security interests. France, Britain, America. And now they refuse Russia and China because Russia and China wants to let the rest of the nations on Earth be permanent members, but America refuses to let all the nations on Earth be permanent members of the Security Council with equal voting power as permanent members. While China and Russia wants to let all the nations to be permanent members, you got America refusing it. You got British refusing it. And so you have Antonio Guterres, Secretary General, realizing that this is counterproductive by America and Britain and France. And Antonio Guterres wants to let the rest of the world sit as permanent members. But you got this hegemonic, neo-colonial superpower, world soul superpower, America, grandstanding on the world stage. While a dementia old president runs with his Corvette through so many red lines, or may I say red lights, giving the wink wink to launch green light long-range attacks all over Russia. Like he wants to burn the house down because he feels like he feels slighted by his own party members in the Democratic Party. That he wants to stick the middle finger up at Nancy Pelosi instead of Schumer and say, fuck yourselves, y'all fired me, so I'm gonna burn the house down out of spite. By crossing my wishes not to launch missiles into Russia because it's a bad idea. I tried to hold him back for 2 years, but now he wants to stick up the middle finger at me and say, go fuck yourself, Romero Latorre. Trying to defy as a slight and say, fuck yourselves, and giving the green light to launch long-range missiles into Russia out of slight, out of spite. As an old dementia, Alzheimer's, he wants to have his way and say, go fuck yourselves for firing me. Does this make sense, this bottleneck in the United Nations, this relic of a world hegemonic power on the world stage, while Russia and China wants to let all the nations on Earth sit in that permanent council as permanent members, to let all countries on Earth be permanent members, you got British, France, and this hegemonic, neo-colonial, so-so superpower, America, acting like they're Roman imperials, where all roads lead back to Rome. Meaning Washington, the Senate, this pagan Washington manifest destiny on a world stage. Does this sound like the rest of the world wants to be under this hegemonic power? Let alone a single selfish pagan that they worship as the Constitution of George Washington monuments. Pagan leak propping up their version of the Roman Empire through the Senate of Washington, D.C. So you got this bottleneck that you call the Western-led orders. The three permanent bottleneck powers of a bygone era, of a relic. And you got the Secretary General that wants to reform the United Nations to adapt to the needs of the 21st century, and they refuse to let Antonio Guterres make every nation's permanent members. America mainly, and then Britain, and then France. They refuse to let Antonio Guterres let every nation to sit at the table as equal permanent members when it comes to world national security issues. They refuse. Because this indispensable, neo-colonial, hegemonic, world sole superpower, America, thinks that they're a Roman version of Washingtonian Roman empires on the world stage. When you got Mitch McConnell's wearing togas in the Senate of a Washington pagan that they worship constitutionally. Will manifest destiny on the world stage, that one man's constitution of paganism, of American version of the Roman Empire, when they think that all roads globally lead back to Washington. So at the end of the day, this system needs to be eradicated from the United Nations. And yes, you have to let Antonio Guterres reform that organization to deal with the 21st century needs. Washington, or neocons, on a global stage as a hegemonic world, what they call it, indispensable world sole superpower of pagan Washingtonians. They don't want to let the rest of the world deal with the issues of the world. America doesn't. Because we want to maintain a Roman Empire on the world stage. We want to maintain a Roman Empire of Mitch McConnell senates on the world stage. Neocons. Alt-rights. And while the rest of the world cries and yearns to be free and have their equal place at the table, America refuses. So you got Russia and China, which represents the global south, the third world, and the struggles and the cries for the third worlds to have freedoms and liberations within the United Nations, to represent themselves equally when it comes to national security issues of the global order. But you got this bottleneck that America purposely created. America thinks like it's America's soap opera on the world stage. Like sands through the hourglass, so are the days of our hegemonic, neocon, Washingtonian pagan Roman version of American imperialism on the world stage. That this is some days of our lives soap opera that America is on a grandstanding stage where it is all about America and the world comes last. And every nation in the world comes last. And so you got the global south, and you got China and Russia trying to liberate the global south, trying to evolve the United Nations, trying to let everybody and every nation on earth to be permanent members, to have equal voting powers. While you have this bottleneck of Washington and British and French launching missiles into Russia, attacking Russia directly, in the hopes that they will provoke Russia into World War III. In the hopes that they will provoke Russia into World War III. This bottleneck of a Western-led order by these three nations, monopolistic three nations of Europe, America, British, and French. Governance of selfish leaders between Biden, Macron, and the Prime Minister of Britain. Selfish leaders. While you got China and Russia saying, let the doors open. Let the third world in. Let the global south in. Let Eastern Europe in. Let them all have a place at the table. Even let the rest of the Western nations have a permanent place on the Security Council as permanent members. Because America doesn't want to let Italy, Spain, Germany, Poland, Finland, none of them to sit as permanent members. Because there's a bottleneck. And America wants to keep its imperial Roman pagan Washington indispensable power on the world stage as a neocon. So even the Eurozone members are being violated. Italy, Spain, Germany, Poland, Finland, all of y'all European nations are being snuffed to not be allowed to sit as permanent members. So y'all are all imprisoned to go along with the ride of Washingtonian pagans, of the American versions of the Roman Empire, by people like Mitch McConnell that wear togas for his whole life, and that Senate emulating that all roads globally lead back to Rome, or may I say Washingtonian pagans, with their manifest destiny under one delusional constitution that wants to be neocons on the rest of the world stage. And so you got Russia and China defending the emerging third world nations to have their place at the table, to be liberated from oppression, from this asymmetrical world hegemonic currency that America calls the world reserve status. The third world yearns to be free economically, while America wants to keep the world pegged to its currency and enslave the whole world as a colonies of economic sectors throughout Europe, throughout Asia, throughout the Arab lands, throughout the African lands, throughout the Latin American lands, throughout Canada. America wants to keep the whole world imprisoned to the world reserve currency as though if y'all were all peasants living in their colonies underneath a Washingtonian Roman Empire of paganism neocons under one man's derangement of manifest destiny, George Washington. The root of all evil is the love of money, especially by one neocon nation as the indispensable world hegemonic, world sole superpower. So you got Russia and China yearning to be free. You got the third world, the global south, and the Eastern Europe yearning to be free. But America refuses to open the door in that permanent monopoly that they call the bottleneck of the United Nations Permanent Security Council. What's wrong with this picture? It's gluttony. That's what's wrong with this picture. It's pure gluttony. So in this American version of the Roman Empire, you had the Senate of Washington hegemonically as neocons, thinking that one man's worshipment of political views of George Washington paganism through the Washington Monument represents their near views of neocons on the world stage hegemonically as the world's sole superpower, thinking that the American version of the imperialism of Romanistical pagan worshipment of a Washington manifest destiny can keep the whole world pegged to our currency, while the third world suffers in trickle-down economics from this world reserve currency. Well, all roads of commerce, global commerce, have to lead back to this Roman pagan Washington capital mount that y'all call Washington, D.C. While you have Russia being bombarded by these bottleneck permanent three members, being bombarded because they want to allow the rest of the world to have their seat at the table, while America refuses to allow the rest of the countries on earth to have a say when it comes to the norms of international laws and the pertinent security issues that faces the world. America wants to hog this stage as a neocon, pagan, indispensable world sole superpower. Does that sound just for the rest of the world's humanities? Does that sound just for the rest of the European members to be held captive under this neocon imperial version of Washington Roman Empire on the world stage, with American senators arguing how they're going to divide and divvy up and conquer the global order. Like Mitch McConnell, the longest serving senator in this American version of the Roman Senate, wearing his three-piece suit, or may I say his toga. Does this sound just for the United Nations when the Secretary General is trying to evolve the organization body and the structures and the agencies and the committees within the organization that we call the United Nations? America refuses his authority as Secretary General to let all nations on earth be permanent members. So you start to see this neocon manifest destiny run amok that we call the experiment of Washington, George Washington, on the world stage with neocons, life-serving senators that try to emulate paganism under one-man delusions of constitutional beliefs. They make it manifest destiny on a world stage as neocons, as Americans impersonating the Empire of Rome globally. As Mitch McConnell, the oldest serving senator in American history, wearing his toga, or may I say his three-piece suit. So you start to see that Russia is leading a movement in the global south to liberate from this impunic world soul superpower, imputing and exerting its oppression on the rest of the world. When I talk about this government in America on the Mount of Washington, when one country gags the Secretary General of the United Nations and ties his arms behind his back and refuse him from evolving the structures of the United Nations to meet the needs of the 21st century, they gag him with veto power. They tied his hands behind his back, this indispensable hegemonic neocon world soul superpower that we call the monopolistic imperial Washington romantic empires of flirting with the senates of the likeness of Mitch McConnell and all the neocons. Bipartisanly, the Democrats are also laying down in bed with this American experiment, gone awry on the world stage, run amok on the world stage. So when the third world regions, all of Latin America and the Caribbean, all of Africa continent, all of the Middle East continent, all of Asia, all of Eastern Europe, and even Western European countries yearn to be free from the enslavement of this Washington capital Roman imperialism as neocons, because I'm pretty sure the rest of the European members wants to be permanent members and have their place at the table as permanent Security Council members. So even the European members are held captive by America's gluttony as a hegemonic neocon power of a soul world global order. So even the European members, France, Germany, British, Switzerland, Poland, all of y'all European members are held captive by this Washingtonian paganism and not allowed to have your places at the table as permanent members. So y'all are just as shackled as the rest of the world to Washington imperialism. And so I yearn to vanquish this gluttony away from the world stage. I yearn to crumble their foundations of their imperialistical ambitions when they fantasize on a world stage as a neocon indispensable world in Roman imperial, when they flatter themselves and try to emulate Rome, and at Washington monuments controlled by the senates of togas, bipartisanly by politicians in that Mount of Washington, when the rest of the world is enslaved and shackled to a few nays and yays of Senate votes bipartisanly to keep the world enslaved, to keep the world shackled. So you start to see this experiment of America is truly a nightmare on the world stage.